Ever feel like you're stuck playing checkers and everyone else around you has somehow learned to play chess?
Mm.
Well, today we are diving into a book that promises to completely up your strategy game no matter what game you're playing, The Art of War.
Uh-huh.
Now, I know what you're thinking, oh, The Art of War, classic. But you probably heard the name Sun Tzu, right?
Right.
But get this. This book, his work on strategy, it isn't just about winning battles. It's about winning in life.
And that's what's so fascinating about The Art of War. It's really easy to dismiss it as just like some dusty old military manual, but you crack it open and these principles are surprisingly relevant to everyday situations. And honestly, Sun Tzu was basically laying out a blueprint for achieving your goals, no matter what the playing field is.
And that playing field could be anything from negotiating a raise to figuring out how to get your kids to eat their vegetables, right?
Absolutely.
But before we decode all of those strategies, I kind of have to ask, like, who was this mysterious Sun Tzu anyway? Some people claim he wasn't even a real person.
It's true. Yeah, the authorship of The Art of War is a bit of a head-scratcher.
Okay.
Sun Tzu actually translates to Master Sun, which doesn't exactly narrow things down. You know, there is evidence that suggests, he might have been like a real military strategist who lived in ancient China. But there's also a good chance that he was a product of something called euhemerism.
Okay, you have to explain this one. Euhemerism. That sounds like some kind of ancient philosophy.
It kind of is. It's kind of like, imagine if you have all these brilliant military tactics and strategies that have been passed down for generations, and eventually they get attributed to this single, almost mythical figure.
Right.
And that's kind of what euhemerism is. It's like turning ideas and wisdom into a legendary person.
So like a Chinese King Arthur of strategy, but for outsmarting your opponents instead of fighting dragons.
Exactly. And it gets even more intriguing because in the 1970s, archaeologists unearthed these bamboo slips, the Inquisition Han slips.
Wow.
And they contained a version of The Art of War. But they also found military writings credited to someone named Sun Bin, who we're pretty sure was a real historical figure and may have even been Sun Tzu's ancestor.
Oh, wow. Talk about a plot twist.
Yeah.
A potential long-lost relative who's adding fuel to the mystery. But, family drama aside, we know the ideas in The Art of War have survived for centuries. So let's dive into those legendary 13 chapters, right?
Let's do it. And those chapters, those are where the real gold is.
I mean, some of these sound like they could be self-help books, right?
Totally.
Laying plans, waging war, maneuvering an army.
Yeah.
I mean, those are pretty straightforward. But then there's attack by stratagem, weak points, and strong, even use of spies.
Yeah.
I mean, how often do you encounter spies in your daily life? Hopefully not that often.
That's the beauty of The Art of War, is that you shouldn't let the titles fool you. Sun Tzu was really using these military terms as metaphors for broader life strategies.
Okay, so unpack that a little bit for us. What does attack by stratagem mean outside of a battlefield?
Think of it this way. Have you ever, convince someone to do something for you by making them think it was their idea all along?
Oh, yeah?
That's attack by stratagem in action. Sun Tzu was all about achieving your goals by using wit and planning and outmaneuvering your opponent. Whether that opponent is, a competitor or a difficult coworker or even just a tricky situation you need to navigate.
It's like that old saying, the best way to win an argument is to avoid it altogether.
Exactly. And that leads us to one of Sun Tzu's probably most famous principles, which is knowing your opponent. And he actually says, if you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. And this doesn't just apply to wars, right?
Right.
Think about any challenging situation you've faced. Understanding the motivations and strengths and weaknesses of the other side, whether it's a person or a problem, it's crucial to coming out on top.
It's like when you're prepping for a job interview. You wouldn't just walk in blind, would you?
No way.
You do your research on the company and try to understand the role and anticipate what the interviewer is going to ask you.
Right.
That's all part of knowing your opponent.
Pris. And just like in a job interview, knowing yourself is equally important. Sun Tzu really stresses that recognizing your weaknesses, it's not about being self-deprecating or anything. It's about being strategic.
So it's not about hiding your flaws.
Right.
It's about understanding how they might be perceived and then planning accordingly.
Exactly.
So if public speaking really isn't your strong suit, maybe you practice your presentation until it's absolutely flawless, or you find a different way, a better way for you to showcase your strengths.
Exactly. By being aware of your weaknesses, you can actually turn them into advantages. And it's that kind of strategic thinking that really sets apart the casual chess player from the grandmaster.
Yeah.
Or in Sun Tzu's world, the victorious general.
Speaking of grandmasters, I was reading that the art of war has been studied by everyone from like ancient emperors to like modern day CEOs.
Yeah.
Weren't there some pretty famous historical figures who like swore by Sun Tzu's teachings?
Absolutely. One really fascinating example is the Japanese warlord Takeda Shingen. So imagine being so skilled in strategy that your enemies fear you before a battle even begins. That was Takeda Shingen, and he credited his success, in part, to Sun Tzu's teachings.
It makes you wonder, like, what kind of edge can you gain in your own life from applying these principles?
Right.
Did he, like, actually use tactics straight out of the art of war?
He did, yeah. One of the most famous examples is the Battle of Kawanakajima, where Shingen was facing off against his arch-rival Wusudi Kenshin. And Shingen uses this classic Sun Tzu maneuver where he pretends to retreat, luring Kenshin's forces right into this perfectly planned ambush.
Talk about playing 4D chess.
Right.
And it worked.
It did. It was a decisive victory for Shingen, and it cemented his reputation as, like, this brilliant strategist. But here's the thing, like, you don't have to be a warlord, right, to appreciate the genius of that move.
Right.
Think about a time you've outsmarted someone, even in a really small way, by kind of anticipating their actions. Maybe you outsmarted a sibling in, like, a playful argument, or you negotiated a better deal on something by kind of predicting the seller's next move. Those are all examples of Sun Tzu's principles in action, even if we don't realize it at the time.
It's like Sun Tzu was saying, life is a game of strategy, so better come prepared to play.
Right.
And it's not just military minds, right, who have found inspiration in the art of war. You mentioned earlier that even like modern-day figures like the coach Bill Belichick have turned to it for guidance.
It's true. Belichick, the mastermind behind the New England Patriots dynasty, is a self-proclaimed admirer of Sun Tzu.
Which makes sense when you think about how strategic football is.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, coaches spend hours studying their opponents and analyzing game film and devising these elaborate plays. It's like a chess match, but on a 100-yard field.
Exactly. And like a good chess player, Belichick understands the importance of deception and adaptability and exploiting your opponent's weaknesses. All key principles from the art of war. And, I mean, his track record kind of speaks for itself. 6 Super Bowl victories.
Right, exactly. Okay, I'm convinced maybe we should all have a copy of The Art of War on our bedside tables.
There you go.
But it's not just about like winning at sports or even in business, right?
Right.
The Art of War has actually had kind of a surprising influence on pop culture.
It really has.
Like it's kind of everywhere once you start to notice it.
It really is. Like, think about Gordon Gekko from the movie Wall Street, this like ruthless corporate raider who's obsessed with the art of war. I mean, it's become a little bit of a cliche, but it just shows how much these ancient principles have like permeated our modern understanding of strategy and competition.
It's interesting how even in these fictional worlds, these core themes of strategy and outmaneuvering your opponent, they still resonate. And it's not always about like cutthroat ambition either.
Right.
I remember there was an episode of Star Trek, The Next Generation, where Captain Picard is happy that they still teach Sun Tzu's work at like Starfleet Academy.
Yeah.
It proves that even in this like futuristic world, that those ideas, they still hold value.
Totally. It's a testament to the timelessness of Sun Tzu's insights. Whether you're, a starship captain or a CEO or just someone trying to navigate the daily challenges of life, those principles of strategy and planning and understanding human nature, they remain incredibly relevant.
It really makes you wonder if Sun Tzu had any idea that his work would still be shaping minds centuries later.
Right.
And like even inspiring like, sci-fi writers.
Totally.
But it's one thing to read The Art of War, right? It's a whole other thing to actually apply this wisdom to your own life.
And that's the challenge, right? Like, it's really easy to get caught up in kind of the intellectual side of the art of war. But, Sun Tzu wasn't just interested in theories. Like, he really wanted to equip people with practical tools for actually navigating these challenges.
So how do we bridge that gap? How do we bridge that gap between, like, ancient wisdom and modern day life?
Right.
Like, what's the key takeaway here for our listeners? Like, a lot of them are probably thinking like, okay, this is all fascinating, but I'm not exactly leading an army into battle anytime soon.
Right, exactly. And, think about it this way. How often do you find yourself kind of reacting to situations rather than feeling like you're really in control of them?
Oh, all the time.
Right. Maybe you're constantly putting out fires at work, or you feel like you're always kind of one step behind in your personal life.
Hmm.
Sun Tzu would probably say that's because you're fighting battles that you never had to fight in the first place.
Whoa, that's a powerful thought. So it's not about like seeking out conflict, but it's kind of understanding how to approach those challenges strategically so we can avoid like unnecessary battles altogether.
Exactly. Like one of his most, I think, insightful principles is this idea that every battle is won before it's ever fought.
Wow.
He's really emphasizing the importance of preparation and planning and strategic thinking. So in other words, like the more time you spend planning, anticipating those potential obstacles, the less likely you are to be caught off guard
Yeah.
and forced into that kind of reactive mode.
So instead of just waiting for things to happen to us,
Right.
we should be, thinking several steps ahead, like a chess player, anticipating those moves and then planning our own accordingly.
Exactly.
But like, what does that actually look like, though, in everyday life?
Yeah. I think it starts with being more just mindful and intentional in your actions. Like, what are your goals, both big and small? What are the potential obstacles that might get in your way? And most importantly, how can you prepare yourself to overcome those obstacles before they even arise? And that could be as simple as like, mapping out your to-do list for the week, or finally having that difficult conversation that you've been putting off.
Yeah.
Or even just like taking some time for yourself to recharge so you can avoid burnout.
So it's about shifting our mindset from kind of a mindset of reaction to one of proactivity.
Exactly. And that takes practice. But the rewards can be significant because ultimately what Sun Tzu reminds us is that while we can't control everything that happens to us, we can control how we respond.
That's so true.
And by cultivating our strategic thinking and our adaptability, we can kind of navigate these inevitable challenges of life with more, grace and resilience and ultimately success, whatever that looks like for you.
That's a great note to end on. So the next time you're feeling stuck, remember the wisdom of Sun Tzu. Take a step back, assess that battlefield, plan your strategy, and remember, every battle is won before it's ever fought. All right, get ready to explore because today we're diving deep into Alpha Centauri, right in our cosmic backyard. And, it's more than just being the closest star system to us. It's way more interesting than that.
You're absolutely right. We're talking about 3 stars, not just one, and each one has a story to tell. Plus, there's a real chance of planets around these stars, maybe even some that could support life.
Okay, before we get ahead of ourselves, how about setting the scene a little bit? You send over that Wikipedia article, and it says that Alpha Centauri is a bit over 4 light years away. Now, I know that sounds incredibly far, and it is by human standards, but in the grand scheme of the universe, that's like right next door.
Totally. Think about it. Our Milky Way galaxy is about 100,000 light years across. So, yeah, 4 light years is practically a hop, skip, and a jump in cosmic terms.
Cosmic neighbors.
Okay.
And not just any neighbors, but a whole stellar family. Tell me more about this 3-star system. What makes it so special?
Okay, so picture this. 2 stars, Alpha Centauri A and B, locked in a sort of celestial dance, orbiting each other like partners in a waltz. They're a binary system, which means their gravity keeps them spinning around a common center.
I can practically hear the space waltz music. And their dance floor is basically in our front yard, cosmically speaking. Yeah. But hold on, you mentioned 3 stars. Who's the third wheel at this cosmic party?
Ah, right. We can't forget Proxima Centauri. It orbits much farther out from the main pair, kind of like a distant relative who pops in every now and then.
So we've got the dynamic duo, Alpha Centauri A and B, and then there's Proxima Centauri, the distant cousin. The Wikipedia article even calls the system Rigil Kentaurus. Is that just astronomers being difficult or what?
No, not at all. It's actually a really cool mix of old and new. You see, astronomers use Alpha Centauri because it follows a system that's been around for centuries. But Rigil Kentaurus, which means foot of the centaur, comes from ancient Arabic astronomy. It refers to the constellation they're part of.
I love that, a nod to history and science. So let's talk about these stellar roommates. Are any of these stars anything like our own sun?
Alpha Centauri A is surprisingly similar to our sun. It's almost like they're twins. A bit bigger and brighter, but the same yellow-white color and the same overall spectral type. Honestly, if you could stand on a planet around Alpha Centauri A, you might even think you were back in our own solar system, at least as far as the star goes.
Wow, a near-identical sun. Astronomers must be geeking out over that. But what about its dance partner, Alpha Centauri B? Similar, or more of the, let's say, wild child of the family?
Alpha Centauri B is smaller and cooler than its sibling. It has more of an orange-ish color. It's also a bit more prone to, shall we say, dramatic outbursts. It throws out a lot more X-ray energy, kind of like a sibling who's a bit more prone to tantrums.
Stars, they really are just like us. Okay, so we've got the sun-like star, the slightly more volatile star, and then there's Proxima Centauri, the distant relative. What's Proxima Centauri all about?
Proxima Centauri is what we call a red dwarf star, much smaller and cooler than both Alpha Centauri A and B. It's so faint, in fact, that you need a telescope to see it. But here's the kicker. Even though it's part of a three-star system, Proxima Centauri actually holds the record for being the absolute closest star to our sun.
Okay, so our nearest stellar neighbor is actually a red dwarf, not another sun-like star. That's pretty cool. But let's get to the exciting part. You mentioned planets before. Are we talking other Earths around these stars? Spill the details.
This is where it gets really interesting. We know for sure that Proxima Centauri has at least 2 planets, and one of them, Proxima Centauri B, well, let's just say it's pretty darn intriguing.
Intriguing how? You can't just leave me hanging like that.
All right, so picture this. A planet roughly the size of Earth, orbiting its star in what astronomers call the habitable zone. It's the sweet spot, where temperatures could be just right for liquid water to exist on the planet's surface. And that, as I'm sure you know, is a pretty big deal when we're talking about the possibility of life.
Okay, so Proxima B is checking a lot of boxes. Earth-sized, in the habitable zone, and basically right next door on a galaxy scale. This is starting to sound like something out of science fiction. But before we get too caught up in the mind-blowing possibilities of life on Proxima B, I want to know more about how astronomers actually find these planets around other stars, especially stars that are in this complicated dance like Alpha Centauri A and B.
That is a great question, and it gets to the heart of exoplanet hunting. You see, it's not as easy as just pointing a telescope at a star and seeing little planets whizzing around it. They're incredibly faint compared to their stars and often get lost in the glare.
So how in the world do astronomers find them? It seems almost impossible.
It's definitely challenging, but astronomers have come up with some pretty ingenious methods. One of the most common ones is called the radial velocity method. Imagine you're watching a tug of war, and one side, they have a whole bunch of people really strong, and the other side just has one person. You might not even be able to see that one person, but you can tell they're there because of how much the rope is moving.
I'm with you. The big group is the star, and the lone person, who we can't see, is the planet.
Exactly. And that's kind of how astronomers detect planets around other stars, even though we can't see them directly. The gravity of a planet, even a small one, will cause a tiny wobble in the star's movement. And while we can't see that wobble directly, we can see how it affects the star's light.
So if the starlight seems to kind of wobble, that means there's a planet tugging on it.
You got it. It's super subtle, but by measuring those changes in the star's light, astronomers can figure out not only if there's a planet there, but also how massive it is and how far away it is from its star.
That's pretty amazing. It's like they're doing cosmic detective work, using light to find hidden worlds.
Yeah.
But you mentioned this was one of the most common methods. What other techniques do astronomers use to find these exoplanets?
Oh, they've got a whole toolbox full of tricks. Another method, and it's getting more and more powerful, is the transit method. This one, let me see. Imagine you're looking at a lighthouse at night.
Okay, I can picture that.
Now imagine a tiny moth flying right in front of the lighthouse beam.
I'm picturing it.
You wouldn't be able to see the moth itself, right? It's too small against that bright light. But you would see the lighthouse beam dim ever so slightly as the moth passed by.
Ah, okay. So the moth is like the planet, and the lighthouse is the star.
Exactly. When a planet passes in front of its star from our point of view, it blocks a tiny, tiny fraction of the star's light. Astronomers call this a transit, and by studying those transits, they can learn a lot about the planet, its size, its orbit, things like that.
So I've got the wobble method and the transit method, both using light and gravity to unlock these secrets. But you said before that finding planets around Alpha Centauri A and B has been especially tough. Why is that? If they're right next door, shouldn't it be easier?
You'd think so, right? But that's the thing about neighbors. Sometimes they can be a bit complicated. In this case, it's that binary nature of Alpha Centauri A and B, that cosmic dance we talked about, that makes things a bit trickier.
How so?
Yeah,
I thought having two stars would be twice the fun for planet hunting.
you'd think, wouldn't you? But imagine trying to listen to a quiet conversation while you're right next to a roaring jet engine.
That sounds impossible.
It's kind of like that. The two stars, Alpha Centauri A and B, their gravity is so strong and they're pulling on each other constantly. It makes it tough to pick out the much weaker signal of a planet orbiting either one.
So it's like trying to find a whisper in a hurricane.
Pretty much. It's a real challenge, but astronomers, they're a determined bunch. They're coming up with new instruments and techniques all the time to try and solve this puzzle.
Well, that's good to hear because I'm dying to know if there are other planets hiding in this system, especially around those two stars. What have we found so far?
Well, no confirmed planets around Alpha Centauri B yet. But for Alpha Centauri A, there's been a pretty interesting development.
Oh, do tell.
Remember those new techniques I mentioned? Well, astronomers have picked up a signal, a very faint one, that just might be from a planet orbiting Alpha Centauri A. Now, I have to stress, this is still early days and we need more observations to be sure.
Of course, of course. But let's assume for a moment that it is a planet. What can you tell us about it?
Well, if it's real, it's definitely not a small, rocky world like Proxima b. The data suggests it's pretty big, maybe several times the mass of Neptune, which means...
A gas giant.
You got it. A gas giant orbiting a sun-like star right in our cosmic neighborhood. It's an exciting hint of what might be out there.
This is incredible. So to recap, we've got Proxima Centauri with its at least two confirmed planets, one of which might be a lot like Earth and might have conditions right for life. And then we have this potential gas giant around Alpha Centauri A. And this is all just a stone's throw away in the grand scheme of things. My mind is officially blown.
And we're just getting started. As our technology gets better and better, who knows what other secrets Alpha Centauri might reveal?
Okay, before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's take a step back for a second. I know our listeners are probably trying to wrap their head around all of this incredible information. We've covered a lot of ground. The types of stars in Alpha Centauri, the challenges of finding planets around binary stars, the possibility of a Neptune-sized planet around Alpha Centauri A. It's a lot. But I always like to bring things back down to Earth, you know? So why does all of this matter to the average person? Why should they care about what's happening around stars that are light years away?
That's a question that's been with humanity for, well, probably as long as we've looked up at the stars and wondered. It's about something bigger than ourselves, isn't it? This deep-seated need to explore, to understand our place in the universe, the possibility of finding life beyond Earth, especially somewhere as close as Alpha Centauri, it just captures the imagination.
It's like that age-old question, are we alone? Finding even the simplest life forms on another planet would suggest that we're not, and that's, well, it's huge.
It really is. It opens up a whole new world of questions and possibilities. Imagine the scientific discoveries, the philosophical questions, the sheer wonder of encountering another form of life. It would change how we see the universe and ourselves.
It's almost too much to dig your head around. But beyond the profound implications of finding life, isn't there also something to be said for the act of exploration itself? You know, pushing the boundaries of what we know, what we think is possible.
100%. Exploring the universe is in our nature, wouldn't you say? It's about challenging ourselves, venturing into the unknown and expanding our horizons. Who knows what we'll discover along the way?
It's about asking the big questions, the really big ones, and then searching for answers, even if those answers lead to even more questions. And I have a feeling Alpha Centauri has a whole lot more answers to reveal.
I think you're right about that. With every new discovery, every new piece of technology, we're getting closer to unraveling the secrets of this incredible star system.
Speaking of secrets, let's talk more about Proxima Centauri b for a minute. We know it's in the habitable zone, which is incredible, but what does that actually mean for the possibility of life? Is it a paradise planet, or are there challenges for life as we know it around a red dwarf star?
Well, that's the thing about habitable zones. They're a good starting point, but they don't tell the whole story. Life around a red dwarf star, well, let's just say it would come with its own set of unique challenges. Right, so think about it this way. Red dwarfs are a lot cooler and fainter than our sun.
Okay.
And that means the habitable zone, that sweet spot where temperatures are right for liquid water, well, it has to be a lot closer to the star.
So instead of Earth being a comfortable distance from the sun, it had to be way closer, like practically cuddling up to it to stay warm?
Exactly. But getting too cozy with a red dwarf star, well, it comes with its own set of problems.
Oh, like what?
One of the big ones is that planets in those tight habitable zones, they can get tidally locked to their star.
Tidally locked. Okay, you're going to have to explain that one. I have no idea what that means.
So you know how the moon always shows us the same face?
Yeah.
That's tidal locking. One side is always facing the Earth. And it's the same idea with a tidally locked planet around a red dwarf. One side would always be day, facing the star, and the other side would always be night.
Wow, that would make for some seriously strange days and nights, not to mention the jet lag. But besides the weird day-night situation, what other challenges would life face on a planet like that?
Well, red dwarfs, they can be a bit temperamental, let's say.
Temperamental how?
They're known for having these powerful flares.
Flares?
Huge bursts of energy that, well, they wouldn't be very good for anything trying to live on a nearby planet.
Like living next to a volcano that could erupt at any moment.
That's a pretty good way to put it. Those flares, they could strip away a planet's atmosphere, even boil away any liquid water on the surface. Definitely not ideal conditions for life to start, let alone survive.
It's amazing how much the type of star can affect a planet's chances for life. It really makes you appreciate how lucky we are here on Earth with our stable sun and just the right conditions.
Absolutely. But you know, even with all those challenges, life is surprisingly resilient.
Right. Life finds a way, right? Like, who are we to say that life couldn't find a way to exist even on a planet with intense flares and a permanent day side and night side?
Exactly. I mean, look at some of the extreme environments we find life on Earth, deep in the ocean, in hot springs, even in Antarctica. It's amazing. Who's to say that life on Proxima b, if it's there, hasn't found its own way to adapt?
So life on Proxima b, if it exists, could be totally different from anything we can imagine. It could be something we wouldn't even recognize as life.
That's the exciting part, isn't it? We're so used to thinking about life as we know it, but life on other planets could be completely different.
This is all so fascinating. But we've been speculating a lot here. What are the actual chances of finding out for sure? Proving that there's life on Proxima b or any of the other planets in Alpha Centauri?
The million-dollar question. And I wish I had a simple answer for you, but it's not complicated. For one thing, these planets are incredibly far away.
Right, even our best telescopes can only see so much detail from such a distance.
Exactly. And then there's the fact that we're searching for something we've never seen before, you know? We don't even know exactly what we're looking for, what signs of life might look like on a planet so different from our own.
So it's like searching for a treasure chest, but you don't even know what the key looks like, let alone where the chest is buried.
That's a great way to put it. But hey, we're learning more all the time. The field of astrobiology is constantly advancing, coming up with new technology and new ideas.
So you're saying it's not a matter of if, but when. We just need to keep at it.
That's the spirit. And who knows? Maybe one day we'll have the technology to send probes to Alpha Centauri. We could study these planets up close and personal, get some real answers.
Now that would be incredible. The data we could gather, the things we could learn. Talk about a giant leap for humanity.
It would be a game changer, that's for sure. And hey, it's a goal worth shooting for, even if it takes a while to get there.
This whole conversation has really been eye-opening. Alpha Centauri. It's not just some abstract concept anymore. It's a real place with real planets and maybe, just maybe, real life.
It really puts things in perspective, doesn't it? We're part of something much bigger, something that's still being written.
Well said. Well, I think we've given our listeners a lot to think about today. Any parting words of wisdom for them?
Just this. Next time you look up at the night sky, see if you can find Alpha Centauri. It's a faint star, but it's there. A reminder that the universe is full of wonders waiting to be discovered.
That's a beautiful thought. And on that note, thank you, everyone, for joining us on this incredible journey to Alpha Centauri. Until next time, keep exploring. All right, so get this. We're diving deep into heart transplants today, and you send over some excerpts from the Wikipedia article on heart transplantation. It's like a great place to start.
It really does. I mean, it shows just how far we've come, you know, from those early experimental days to the super complex surgeries that we see today.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, just the whole idea of swapping out a failing heart with a healthy one is mind-blowing, you know, but How did this all even begin?
Well, the first attempts might surprise you. We weren't transplanting human hearts right from the start.
Wait, really? What were they using then?
Get this, in 1964, they actually transplanted a chimpanzee heart into a human patient. Bold move for sure, but it didn't work out.
A chimpanzee heart.
Yeah.
Wow, that brings up so many questions.
It does. Yeah, this case really highlighted all the ethical stuff around these experimental procedures and, how crucial informed consent is. And those are issues that are still super relevant today, especially when we're looking at things like xenotransplantation.
Xenotransplantation. That sounds pretty futuristic.
It does sound like sci-fi, but it's actually gaining some serious traction. It basically means transplanting organs from one species to another. And in fact, back in 2022, the world saw the first successful pig-to-human heart transplant.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. It was all over the news. So when did we actually get to the point of doing human-to-human heart transplants?
That groundbreaking moment happened back in 1967 when Christian Barnard, a South African surgeon, performed the first successful human-to-human heart transplant.
That must have been huge.
Oh, absolutely. It captured the world's attention and really propelled the whole field forward at an insane pace. I mean, within just a year, they were doing over 100 heart transplants all over the globe.
Wow. Talk about a medical revolution.
Yeah.
So here's some of the other big names, the ones who really shaped this field in those early days.
Well, alongside Barnard, you had surgeons like Norman Shumway in the U.S., and then Richard Lower, who was instrumental in developing the heart-lung bypass machine. Oh, and it's interesting, actually. In that same year, 1967, Adrian Kentrovitz attempted the world's first pediatric heart transplant. They were really pushing the boundaries of what was possible back then.
It's amazing how quickly things progressed, but I bet those early transplants came with a whole bunch of challenges.
Absolutely. One of the biggest hurdles was organ rejection. The body's immune system would basically see the transplanted heart as a foreign invader and try to attack it.
So how do they tackle that problem?
Immunosuppressive drugs were the key. These drugs helped to kind of dampen the immune response, but they had a whole host of side effects, so it was a real balancing act.
I can see how that would be tricky. Trying to suppress the immune system enough to stop the rejection, but not so much that you leave the patient wide open to other health problems? It must have been a constant struggle.
You got it. And in those early days, the immunosuppressants were pretty harsh, which led to a lot of complications. Things didn't really start to change until 1983 when cyclosporine came on the scene.
What was so special about cyclosporine?
Imagine a drug that suddenly allows most heart transplant patients to live for years instead of just days. That was the impact of cyclosporine. It dramatically increased survival rates and basically transformed heart transplantation from a last resort into a viable, long-term solution for patients with end-stage heart failure.
Wow, that's a real game changer. It sounds like cyclosporine completely revolutionized the whole field.
It really did. It allowed doctors to use lower doses of other immunosuppressants, which in turn helped to minimize those nasty side effects.
It's incredible how one single drug can have such a massive impact on an entire field of medicine. But even with these advances, I imagine the availability of donor organs has always been a major issue.
You're absolutely right. Despite all the progress we've made, there are only about 3,500 heart transplants performed each year worldwide. The demand is way higher than the supply, which leaves tons of patients stuck on waiting lists, just hoping for a chance at a new life.
That's heartbreaking to think about. What are some of the ways the medical community is trying to deal with this critical shortage of donor hearts?
Well, there have been some promising developments. One is the adoption of what's called donation after circulatory death, or DCD for short.
Can you explain how that's different from the traditional way of donating organs?
Traditionally, organ donation was tied to brain death. But with DCD, organs can be procured from donors who have suffered cardiac death. It expands the pool of potential donors, but it also brings up some ethical questions about how we define death in this context.
Sounds like a complicated issue with no easy answers. But it's good to know that they're at least trying to find ways to increase the availability of organs for people who desperately need them.
Absolutely. And along with DCD, technology is playing a big role in making the most of the organs we do have. For example, organ care systems are being used now to preserve donor hearts outside the body, which allows for longer transport times and better organ assessment.
So instead of racing against the clock, these systems are giving surgeons more time to make sure that the organ is actually viable for transplantation.
Exactly. It's a really cool advancement that's helping to improve outcomes for transplant recipients.
That's a great place to wrap up this part of our deep dive. I mean, we've gone from chimpanzee hearts to life-saving drugs, and now to these high-tech organ preservation systems. It's clear that heart transplantation has come a long way.
We've just scratched the surface. In the next part, we'll dig deeper into the whole issue of rejection and explore what the long-term outlook is for recipients, and we'll touch on some of the ethical considerations around this life-changing procedure.
Okay, so we're back and still diving deep into this whole world of heart transplants. Last time we were talking about the whole issue of organ availability and some of the cool ways they're addressing that.
Yeah, and those first transplants, revolutionary as they were, they really struggled with that whole rejection problem.
Yeah, exactly. Even with a successful surgery, the body could still reject this incredible gift of a new heart. It seems like a constant battle.
It's definitely a delicate balance, and understanding how that rejection happens is a big part of that.
Okay, so break it down for me. What exactly is it that makes the body see this new heart as like a threat?
Okay, so picture this. Every single one of our cells has this unique set of proteins on its surface called the major histocompatibility complex, or MHC for short. It's kind of like a cellular ID card.
So the immune system uses these MHC proteins to tell the difference between what belongs and what doesn't.
Exactly. When the immune system comes across cells with different MHC proteins, it knows they don't belong and it launches an attack. That's why matching MHC proteins between the donor and recipient is super important, but finding a perfect match isn't always possible.
It really makes you realize how complex this whole thing is, even at the microscopic level.
Hmm.
So how do doctors actually monitor for rejection? Is it something that patients feel, or are there specific tests?
There are a few ways to keep an eye on things. Blood tests can show signs of inflammation, which could mean the immune system is acting up. But the most reliable method is what's called an endomyocardial biopsy.
Endomyocardial biopsy. That sounds pretty intense.
It's a routine procedure where they take a tiny sample of tissue from the inner lining of the heart, and then they examine it under a microscope looking for signs of immune cell infiltration. Basically, those rogue immune cells trying to attack the heart.
So it's like a detective looking for clues at a crime scene, except the crime scene is inside the heart.
Huh. Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And how often they do these biopsies depends on the patient's individual risk factors.
Okay, so let's say they do find signs of rejection. What happens then?
Usually the treatment involves tweaking the immunosuppressive medication. It's all about finding that sweet spot, suppressing the immune system just enough to prevent rejection, but not so much that it opens the door to infections.
Always that balancing act we keep talking about. It's like walking a tightrope between protecting the new heart and protecting the rest of the body.
Exactly. And that's why ongoing care and a good support system are so crucial for heart transplant recipients. Having a team of doctors, nurses, social workers, and even support groups can make a huge difference in dealing with the physical and emotional challenges.
Speaking of the human side of things, I was really interested in that study mentioned in the Wikipedia article about using video-observed therapy to help adolescents stick to their medication regimens.
It's a really cool approach. Adolescence is a tough time for anyone, but can be especially challenging for young transplant recipients who are trying to manage all these complicated medications.
Yeah, it's like having a virtual buddy system to help them stay on track.
Exactly, and it shows how important it is to address the mental and emotional aspects of transplantation, not just the physical stuff.
Absolutely. We've talked a lot about the medical side of things, but what about the ethics of heart transplantation? For example, the article mentions donation after circulatory death, or DCD, and that seems to bring up some pretty complicated questions.
Yeah, DCD definitely has the potential to expand the donor pool, but it means we have to really think about what death means in terms of organ donation. Traditionally, organ donation was tied to brain death, the irreversible loss of all brain function. But DCD broadens that criteria to include people who have died from cardiac death.
So it's not just as simple as checking for a heartbeat anymore. It forces us to really grapple with some deep questions about the end of life.
Right. DCD adds a whole new level of complexity, and that means we need to have open discussions and clear guidelines around informed consent and avoiding any potential conflicts of interest.
It's like we're always having to reevaluate our ethical framework as medical technology advances. With a limited supply of organs, how do we even decide who gets a life-saving transplant?
That's another incredibly complex issue with no easy answers. Right now, the way they allocate organs takes into account a bunch of factors like medical urgency, blood type compatibility, time on the waiting list, and even geographic location.
So it's not as straightforward as first come, first served. There's a lot of thought and ethical consideration that goes into those decisions.
Absolutely. There are algorithms and guidelines in place to try and make sure that organs are distributed fairly and go to the people who are most likely to benefit. But it's an ongoing conversation, and there will always be tough choices to make.
Especially as new technologies emerge, like the xenotransplantation we talked about earlier. What are the ethical implications of using animal organs in humans?
Well, xenotransplantation opens up a whole new can of worms, ethically speaking. For example, what are the implications for animal welfare?
Yeah, it makes you think about where these organs are coming from and making sure animals are being treated ethically.
Exactly. And then there's the whole issue of potentially transmitting animal viruses to humans, which could have some pretty unpredictable consequences for public health.
Thus, we're walking a fine line between potential benefits and unknown risks.
We need to approach xenotransplantation and really any groundbreaking medical advancement with a good mix of excitement and caution.
That's probably a good rule of thumb for medical science in general. Now, before we move on, I want to circle back to the recipients themselves. What can you tell us about life after a heart transplant?
Well, life after a transplant is a journey full of adjustments and challenges. But for a lot of people, it's a chance to live a fuller, more active life than they ever thought possible.
So what are some of the biggest changes recipients have to make to protect their new heart?
Lifestyle changes are key. Diet is a big one. Recipients need to switch to a heart-healthy diet, low in sodium saturated fat and cholesterol.
I bet that's a big adjustment for some people.
It can be.
Yeah.
But, for someone who is facing heart failure, those dietary restrictions are a small price to pay for a second chance at life.
That's a great way to look at it. And what about exercise?
Regular physical activity is super important for maintaining a healthy weight, blood pressure, and just overall cardiovascular fitness. Of course, you have to start slowly and gradually increase activity levels with guidance from a medical professional.
So it's like you're retraining your body to embrace this new heart.
Exactly. It's all about learning to listen to your body and finding that balance between pushing yourself and knowing your limits.
So it's a combination of medical vigilance, lifestyle changes, and a whole lot of self-care. Sounds demanding, but ultimately rewarding.
It is, and while transplant recipients face some unique challenges, their stories are incredibly inspiring. They really show us the power of resilience and the importance of never giving up hope.
That's a great thought to carry with us as we head into the final part of our deep dive. Next time, we'll explore the long-term outlook for recipients, the latest research and innovations in the field, and wrap things up with some final thoughts on the ethical considerations that continue to shape this incredible area of medicine. All right, so here we are in the final part of our deep dive into heart transplants. We've covered a lot of ground so far, from those first experimental procedures to what life is like after a transplant.
And we've seen how this field is really pushing the limits of medical innovation, but also how it raises these profound ethical questions.
Yeah, it's been quite a journey. So now I'm curious about what the long-term outlook is for people who've had a heart transplant. What can you tell me about their quality of life and how long they can expect to live after surgery?
Well, the good news is that the prognosis for heart transplant recipients has gotten so much better over the years. I mean, many people live for decades after their transplant.
Decades. That's amazing to hear.
Yeah.
But I imagine there's still a lot to manage, right? It's not like everything's smooth sailing once they have that new heart.
You're right. Transplantation isn't a cure for heart disease. It's more like a lifelong commitment to taking care of that incredible gift.
So what are some of the most important things that contribute to someone's success long-term after a heart transplant?
Well, one of the biggest things is sticking to their medication regimen. We've talked about how important immunosuppressants are to prevent rejection, but taking those meds consistently, exactly as prescribed, is absolutely crucial. I mean, even missing a dose or two can have some serious consequences.
I can imagine it can be tough to keep up with such a complicated medication schedule.
It definitely can be, especially when you factor in the potential side effects of those medications. That's why support systems are so important. Family, friends, medical professionals, and support groups are all vital in helping recipients navigate the challenges that come after a transplant.
It sounds like it really does take a village to support someone through this whole process.
Mm-hmm.
So besides medication, what other lifestyle changes are really important for staying healthy long-term?
Diet and exercise are essential. Recipients need to follow a heart-healthy diet, low in sodium saturated fat and cholesterol.
So it's about making those healthy choices a permanent part of their life.
Right. It's not just about what you can't have. It's about finding new ways to enjoy food and stay active. Speaking of staying active, regular exercise is super important for keeping a healthy weight, blood pressure, and just overall good cardiovascular health.
But it's not like they're running marathons right after surgery, are they?
No, definitely not. It's all about working with their medical team to come up with a safe and effective exercise plan and then gradually increasing their activity level. It's like they're retraining their body and rediscovering what it can do.
Like learning a new dance with their new heart.
I like that analogy. It really captures the essence of life after a transplant, finding that new rhythm and balance.
And it reminds us that while medical science can offer these amazing opportunities, it's ultimately up to each person to take charge of their own health. So let's shift gears a little and talk about what's next for this field. What are some of the most exciting things on the horizon?
Well, one area with huge potential is xenotransplantation. That's where they transplant organs from animals to humans. Remember that successful pig-to-human heart transplant we talked about? That was a major breakthrough, and it could really change the game by addressing the shortage of donor organs.
Yeah, it sounds like something straight out of science fiction. But like we discussed before, xenotransplantation also has some pretty big ethical concerns that come with it.
You're absolutely right. We need to carefully consider the impact on animal welfare, the risk of infections spreading between species, and how we would even decide who gets these potentially life-saving organs if they become more available.
It's a good reminder that scientific progress always needs to be balanced with ethical considerations.
Wow.
So are there any other promising areas of research you'd like to mention?
Another exciting area is using stem cells to regenerate damaged heart tissue. Researchers are trying to figure out how to use stem cells to repair or even replace damaged heart muscle. It's still early days, but it could potentially eliminate the need for a transplant altogether for some patients.
Wow, that would be incredible. It's amazing to think about all the possibilities out there.
It really shows you the power of human ingenuity and how we never stop looking for solutions to help people with life-threatening conditions.
Well, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive into the fascinating world of heart transplants. We've explored everything from the early attempts to the cutting-edge advancements that are shaping the future of this field.
It's been great exploring this topic with you, and I hope everyone listening has come away with a better understanding of this amazing area of medicine.
Absolutely. It's a story of human resilience, scientific breakthroughs, and the power of hope.
And it's a story that's still being written. As we keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible, I think we can expect even more amazing advancements in the future.
So to all our listeners out there, keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep having those thoughtful conversations about the ethical side of things. And never forget those incredible stories of courage and resilience that make heart transplantation such a powerful symbol of the human spirit overcoming incredible challenges. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you've enjoyed the journey. Until next time, keep exploring and keep your hearts open to the wonder all around us.